In 2732 BCE, the second emperor of China, Shen Nung, set up camp in the shade of a large tree where he prepared a pot of boiling water. All of a sudden, a strong gust of wind came, blowing leaves into the pot of water. There the water gilded and the scent became strong yet pleasant. And the emperor tried the drink and was immediately impressed and captivated, so much to the point that he unconsciously let out the sound cha, which then became the word for tea. He would then teach his subjects how to make tea, changing the world forever. Or so the legend goes.
Oh, hey, I didn't see you there. Welcome to Afternoon Tea with Abby G, where we'll be spilling the tea about tea.
Tea is the second most consumed beverage worldwide. It can be hot or cold, sweet or savory, floral or nutty. But other than that impressive variety, some might argue that in the end, it's just water and leaves. So why is tea popular? Tea has such a big history behind it, spreading throughout almost every country in the world, influencing its culture so significantly that some celebrate its very existence. Let us explore the wonder that is tea together. From 202 BCE to 220 AD, ruled the second dynasty of China, the Han Dynasty. The Han Dynasty came after the Qin Dynasty and restored values that were discarded by them, such as values of education and liberal arts. While doing that, they also created their own traditions and values, such as tea. The original tea plant originated in Assam, India, and in Sichuan and Yunnan in China. That original tea plant that was cultivated there is still the same tea plants that we use today. However, it was originally not used as a beverage. Crazy. The original Chinese tea plant was chewed as a vegetable or brewed in grain porridge. Tea wasn't actually used as a beverage until 15 years ago. The ancient Chinese way of making the tea beverage was by grinding up compressed cakes of tea leaves called pu'er and adding that to hot water. Usually they added it along with onion, ginger, orange, and salt to make a bitter and medicinal beverage. It was super bitter. Wasn't really used as an everyday beverage or just like an enjoyable beverage for fun. It was actually first used as a bitter medicinal drink to cure sleepiness, stomach aches, skin diseases, and even bad eyesight, which I could probably need some of that. Tea was so special that it was also the subject of books and poetry, and was also used as a medium for artists, as they would draw images in the form of matcha, such as our current Instagrammable latte art. This really showed how important tea was to Chinese culture and still is to this very day. The Tang Dynasty was from 618 201 AD, they came up with more processing methods for this tea, which improved the taste of tea a lot and made it more enjoyable for citizens and just common people to drink on a daily basis. And that really commercialized and popularized tea even more and made it a bigger part of Chinese society and really let that spread throughout the whole entire world. From 618 to 901 AD ruled the Tang Dynasty. The Tang Dynasty were able to find better processing methods that improved the taste of tea, which popularized tea even more since now it was enjoyable and available as a leisurely drink. All social classes heavily enjoyed tea, proving its great significance to Chinese culture. Green tea, which is just the regular, straight from the plant tea, was the tea of choice. Black tea wasn't created until the 17th century, where they found out ways to process and ferment tea to make it into black tea. Tang Chinese emperors demanded that tribute to them be paid in tea, and so peasants needed to find ways to acquire tea to be able to give to the emperors. And so because of this, they had to not only work on the rice farms, but they also had to be working at the tea farms at the same exact time because of this. And since, they had to pay their taxes by tea, the tea cultivation kind of overpowered the rice cultivation. So a lot of overworked farmers needed to focus more on their tea and ignore all of their rice crops to be able to supply their emperors with tea. On the northern side of the Himalayas lays Tibet. With constant, harsh winter climates, plants have no place to live. Natives to Tibet suffer due to a lack of nutrients in their diet, only being able to rely on meat. But with the introduction of tea, that all changed. The ancient tea horse roads linked China's southwest provinces to Tibet. So through the tea horse roads, they were able to get tea from China and bring it into Tibet, where they mixed yak milk and yak butter and salt with the tea, and that gave them that plant fiber, those nutrients that they needed to their mainly animal-based diets. And so in exchange for the tea that would forever change their lives, they in return gave China powerful horses, which allowed China to expand furthermore and have a stronger army. Basically a lot of benefits for China because of the horses. Meanwhile, Buddhist monks and traders were moving steadily across the Silk Roads, bringing tea with them to Turkey and Mongolia in the west, Burma in the south, Siberia in the north, and Japan and Korea in the east, in the late 6th century. Okay, so in the Kamakura era, the custom of drinking tea reached the samurai. And surprisingly, or rather ironically, they loved tea. And they would actually host tea parties and spread tea houses and tea culture along Japan, which is kind of funny if you picture these, supposedly tough guys just having tea parties. And while the samurai did popularize tea in Japan, tea basically was super popularized when the shogun of Japan, Sanetome, who lives from 1192 to 1219 CE, was suffering from a complete hangover from just a heck of a party the other night. The shogun of Japan, Sanetome, had just woken up after just participating in a complete rager the other night, and woke up suffering from a hangover so bad that he and everybody that was near him basically thought he was gonna die because it was just that bad of a hangover. But then all of a sudden a knight in armor shows up, which is literally just a Zen Buddhist priest, Nyoen as Eisai, who brought the shogun a bowl of tea along with a copy of his book on the benefits of tea. He knew how to advertise. He would definitely make a great marketer or advertiser. Miraculously cured his hangover really well, and Senotome became a tea addict and spread tea in Japan society because he had that power as a royal, and tea was just that great. You know what I mean? I mean, it tastes great, it cures hangovers. Who wouldn't want tea? So in Japan, those Zen Buddhist monks would eventually create an entire spiritual ceremony around tea, which eventually evolved into the Japanese tea ceremony that still happens today. The Ming Dynasty had power over China. Those compressed tea bricks that China would consume their tea with fell out of fashion, and came the fad of loose leaf tea. So, you know, it was just out with the bricks and in with the steeping tea leaves in boiling water. It was all the rage. Everybody was doing it. If Madonna lived back then, she would have been doing it too. And so also around this time, around like the end of the Ming dynasties, they ended up developing black tea, which was literally just green tea leaves that were fermented and went through this process of fermentation. In tea manufacture, the leaf goes through some stages of withering, rolling, fermentation, and drying. And so the process has a two-step process. Number 1 is to dry the leaf, and number 2 is to allow the chemicals of the leaf to produce the quality that is necessary for each type of tea. So different types of teas are just the same exact leaf, but they're processed differently. So the legends of how black tea came to be, or how black tea was discovered, is that an army from Jiangxi entered the Fujian province and entered the Fujian province and camped at a nearby tea factory. And so this camping session that they weren't expecting basically led to a delay in tea production, and so they laid out the tea leaves in the sun for a longer period of time because there was a delay. Oh, and so this delay caused by this camping session made them leave the tea leaves out in the sun for a longer period of time. And then to save the tea, and so, you know, to preserve the tea and make the drying process faster, and so to preserve the tea and make the drying process faster, the farmer placed the leaves over a fire of pine wood, which smoked the tea and left it super smoky, like a barbecue. And it produced Lapsang Souchong, the original black tea that would soon pave its way into England. Which would soon pave the way for black tea grown in China and eventually make its way into the Western world. Also black tea. ways to say tea, which is 1, tea, and there's also many variations of cha. And so both tea and cha come from the Chinese character for tea. So if a language uses some variation of cha, which is how you say the Chinese character in Mandarin Chinese, then it shows that tea was introduced to that country from the Silk Roads. But in Min Chinese, which is spoken in the Fujian province, the Chinese character is pronounced te. Fujian is where the 17th century Dutch merchants traded with China to Amsterdam. You know, most of those areas in Asia use cha, while most of the western part of the world use te. But the first Europeans in China were the Portuguese, who traded through Macau, where cha is used. And so, you know, since that's towards the west, most of the countries there use te because they were traded through ocean trade. But Portugal is actually the only cha user in an area where they all used te for tea. In 1610, the first shipment of tea was brought to Amsterdam by the Dutch. And then in 1645, the first tea arrived in England as well. Those two places weren't quite fond of tea at first because 1, it was too pricey for a bitter medicinal drink, and 2, the English were huge coffee fanatics, and they just appreciated coffee over tea. However, that all changed when Portuguese princess Catherine of Braganza married Charles II. Catherine loved tea. Like, all of these stories that I've been hearing about Catherine and tea from all of the research that I've done for this project makes me think that she kind of liked tea more than she liked her husband. I get it though, that's understandable. Tea is great. So the first thing she asked for when she landed in England was a cup of tea. And so the British East India Company was like, this is a great opportunity to make some money. And so they gifted Charles and Princess Catherine 1 kilogram of Chinese tea, which, to make it easier for you guys to understand how heavy that is, since we are Americans and don't really use units, that 1 kilograms of Chinese tea is equivalent to the weight of 6 medium-sized apples, 10-inch stainless steel pan, or a toaster, or 2 packs of ground beef, a bunch of sweet potatoes, a small laptop, a pair of women's shoes, a baritone ukulele, or a cabbage. So hopefully that helps you get it. Like, hopefully that gets you to understand how much tea that was. So because Princess Catherine, being the royal she is, was kind of the it girl at the time, everybody just wanted to be her. Everybody just wanted to kind of have her aura, dress up like her. They wanted to act like her. And so, that fashionable society saw that she was drinking tea, and they were like, you know what? I'm gonna drink tea too, because the royals are doing it. Boom! Tea was just really famous in Europe after that. So, Princess Catherine is kind of the person that I want to be. She was the trendsetter of her time. She is an icon. I love Princess Catherine. Tea parties became quite trendy among women across social classes. However, this made men angry that women were having freedom and independence and having fun at these parties, talking amongst one another. So they cried family ruin, and religious reformers called for bans. The East India Company was founded in 1600 through a royal charter from Queen Elizabeth I. It received a monopoly over English trade in the Far East, and the East India Company grew enormously wealthy and was able to conquer territory, mint money, command armies, make war and peace, and collect taxes. It was like its own country. In the early 19th century, it had twice as many soldiers under its command than the British Army. In 1698, the East India Company started to import tea directly from China, and through the 1700s, the amount of tea being imported grew significantly year after year. Millions in Britain were hooked on tea, and it was making the East India Company filthy rich. China held all of the power still, and Europe were only allowed to trade at a single Chinese port, which was Canton. And because China was still like the wealthiest country in the world, it had no need to pay attention to Britain. Of trading silver with China, because they were running low, they thought, what better thing to trade for tea than drugs? Opium, a drug used all throughout Eurasia due to its pain-killing and sedative effects. Europe's plan was to hook China onto opium and trade that in exchange for tea. They decided to take the easy route for them, to have access to opium fields and farms, which was to colonize. They battled with India, and in 1757, the Honorable Company won a decisive victory over the Battle of Plassey, gave them control over Bengal. And Bengal was the richest place in India, was the Pronto industrial textile and chip building capital of the world. So, Europe was making mega bank with that. This led to the Bengal famine, where 10 million Bengalis were starved to death. So, Bengal was deindustrialized and basically taking a ton of steps backwards, and was made into a massive opium field. And so the British was able to drown China with Indian-grown opium, but opium was illegal in China. And so in the middle of the 19th century, 1 in every 3 Chinese adults in China were opium addicts. So in 1840, opium trade brought Britain revenues of $3.8 billion, and then eventually rose to $22 billion by 1879. And all of this money that they got from opium and tea trade gave them a big modern navy. In 1830, the Chinese emperor was over this. Was that's enough. Everybody's just high everybody's an addict, everybody's high all the time. This is not what I want my country to be. He was just so over it. He was done. He was just done. And so he sent an official to deal with the crisis diplomatically. Well, what did that official do? He seized 1.2 million kilos of opium and dumped it into the sea. So, long story short, tea led to a lot of addicts and a lot of wars. Britain had a lot of privileges available to them in China, with more ports open, etc. However, it was not enough for them. They were aware that China was still making a lot of profit off of the trade. Because, God forbid they make money off of their own products. So they decided to find ways to grow their own tea. They knew Assam, India had tea plantations, but when they tried it, it wasn't as good as China's tea. So they hired Scottish botanist Robert Fortune to steal tea plants from China. He dressed up in traditional Chinese attire and was able to learn so much about tea, such as the fact that all the different types of tea actually comes from the same plants. They just have different processing methods to them. So he came back to India with the equipment needed and the best tea plants from the best tea regions in China, and also 6 of the best Chinese tea masters.
This British colonialism and its tea plantations also expanded into Burma, Ceylon, East Africa, and other places who had good conditions for tea. Last half of the 19th century, tea estates covered India, especially Assam. But the problem was more tea plantations meant that they needed more laborers. And so they decided to search for cheap labor. So they were on a mission to find cheap laborers, and they found it by taking Indian slaves from their homes in Bengal and forcing them into tea plantations where the conditions were so bad. Like owners would refuse to feed their laborers, and diseases were just rampant and just spread throughout the whole entire area. Clean water wasn't provided. They had to drink like bacteria-filled, dirty water, and child labor was just such a huge thing there too. It was not good.
Come with me and let's go see how tea is done in different countries. The birthplace of all tea comes from Yunnan province in China, and the original ancient tea is called pu'er. In China, tea trees are worshipped, and they have their own tea ceremony just dedicated to the process of making tea. Just like steak, tea leaves are fermented from weeks to decades, which control its quality and its price. Pu'er is typically sold in compressed cakes, and they are best drunken in small sips. In Japan, the top tea there is matcha, which is grinded green tea leaves. Rituals of preparing the beverage is respected as a common choreographic technique. It concentrates on the aesthetics of the process and motion of the hands, and hosts always have guest interest in mind. Matcha is best enjoyed with sweet treats like mochi, to contrast from the bitter flavor. In Argentina, they drink yerba mate. The tea is served in a gourd, which is shared among guests, and drunken out of a metal straw, which can be made of silver, copper, or stainless steel. They drink masala chai, which is a spiced tea. It contains many spices like ground ginger, peppercorn, cloves, and milk from water buffalo. Masala chai is made from black tea, and there are many different Western variations of it that are so trendy today and very beloved as a everyday drink. boba, which is an iced tea drink that was created in the late 1980s, where milk tea was very popular in Asian countries. Bubble tea has a base of milk tea and tapioca pearls, and is famous for its very silky texture. In Thailand, they enjoy a sweet black tea, which is black tea served with condensed milk. Condensed milk is used in a lot of beverages in Asian countries, so it makes sense for it to be very popular in Thailand. In the United Kingdom, they enjoy an English breakfast tea, which is just black tea with a splash of milk and is enjoyed with protein-rich English breakfast like eggs and bacon. In Egypt, they drink a hibiscus tea, which is from hibiscus tea plants. It was cold tea that was served to the pharaohs to cool them down, and is also served in North Africa during religious ceremonies. In Morocco, they drink green tea, which is served with fresh mint leaves and sugar. Drinking tea symbolizes hospitality, friendship, and a level of comfort with guests, and tea is often poured from 12 inches in a small glass and is an impressive sign of an experienced host. In the United States, we drink Arnold Palmer's, which is a half and half of lemonade and iced tea.
Tea is so commercialized in the modern Western world that we have created so many different ways to consume tea, such as hot tea, hot herbal tea selections, chai tea latte, London fog tea latte, iced tea, and a personal favorite of mine, dirty chai. Tea was sold at really high prices, and then the British taxed tea for even more. So tea was like a lot of money and a luxury for those that for those that were rich.